The empty throne beside her in the heart of the galactic capital stood the Crystal Hall, a place so grand that even stars seemed to dim beside its beauty. The hall stretched for miles, its floor made of glowing glass that reflected the swirling nebulae above. Thousands of alien nobles filled the chamber, each standing in silence, afraid to even breathe too loudly. Upon the highest platform sat the Empress of the Thousand Suns, a being so powerful that worlds trembled at her command. Her eyes shimmered like galaxies. Her silver crown pulsed with living energy, yet beside her throne a single seat stood empty. Untouched for centuries, no one dared to sit there. Legend said that whoever sat beside the Empress without her blessing would vanish into starlight. Some believed it was cursed, others said it was sacred. But no one ever tested it. That empty throne had become a symbol of fear, a warning of what happened when mortals forgot their place. The hall was silent as the Empress listened to her ministers argue about the latest human colony on the edge of her empire. Humans were new to the galactic stage, considered primitive and short-lived by most species. Yet they spread fast, building colonies where no others dared. The Empress found them curious, their courage almost reckless, but her court despised them. While debates raged about politics, far below the throne a human janitor named Eli Carter pushed a cleaning cart through the gleaming corridors. He wore a simple gray uniform and carried an old mop that squeaked with every step. He was invisible to the nobles, just another servant, but to Eli, every piece of this palace was fascinating. He had never seen anything so vast, so alive. The walls hummed with energy. The air shimmered with golden dust. When the doors to the Crystal Hall opened for him, Eli hesitated. He wasn't supposed to enter when the court was in session, but the schedule said this section needed cleaning, and he wasn't about to break his routine. He stepped in quietly, unaware that thousands of alien eyes turned toward him. The nobles gasped, whispering in fear. One of the guards started to shout, but the Empress raised her hand and silence fell again. Eli didn't notice her gesture. He just saw an empty seat beside a glowing throne and thought, "That's a perfect spot to rest my feet." He had been mopping for hours, and his back hurt, so without thinking he set his mop aside and sat down. The entire court froze. Time itself seemed to stop. Ministers dropped their data pads, guards clutched their weapons, and some creatures fainted on the spot. The Empress slowly turned her head, her silver eyes locking onto the human sitting beside her. No one had ever dared such an act. Eli blinked. Realizing the silence had become heavy, he glanced around, confused by the horrified faces staring at him. Sorry, is this seat taken?" he asked softly. His voice echoed across the vast chamber. 1,000 beings held their breath. The Empress studied him for a long, unbroken moment. Her mind reached across centuries, remembering the last time a human had sat there long ago during the First Galactic War. A human commander had defied her enemies and saved her life. He too had sat beside her, calling her friend instead of "your radiance." That man's courage had ended the war, but his death had left her throne forever empty. Now, as she looked at Eli Carter, the tired janitor who sat there without fear, she felt something ancient stir in her heart. She did not see disrespect, she saw honesty, simplicity, and the same quiet strength she had once admired. The corners of her lips curved slightly. A smile, gentle and warm, crossed her face for the first time in centuries. The hall erupted into chaos. Nobles screamed, "He must be executed. It's blasphemy. Remove the human." Guards raised their weapons, ready to drag Eli away. But the Empress lifted her hand again, her voice calm yet powerful. "Silence them all. Leave him," she said. Her words echoed like thunder through the crystal walls. "He will not be harmed." Every alien in the room froze. Their Empress never spoke lightly. Her tone carried the weight of stars. The guards stepped back, lowering their weapons in disbelief. Eli looked around nervously, still unsure what was happening. He gave a small, awkward smile. "Thank you, ma'am," he said, scratching the back of his neck. The Empress tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "Tell me, human," she said softly. "Do you know where you sit?" Eli frowned. "Next to you, I guess," he answered simply. For a moment, the Empress almost laughed. The simplicity of his answer cut through centuries of ceremony and fear. "Yes," she said quietly. "Next to me," and then she rose slowly and gracefully. Her crown glowed brighter than ever. The nobles stepped back in awe. The Empress looked down at her trembling ministers and declared, Remember this moment for the first time in 1,000 years. Someone remembered I am not a god. Eli sat there in silence, not fully understanding what he had just done. But something deep inside the galaxy shifted that day. The human had unknowingly rewritten history. The throne beside the Empress was no longer empty, and across the stars, rumors began to spread of a foolish human who sat beside a goddess and lived to tell the tale. The court in panic. The crystal hall had never been so loud, so alive, so full of chaos. Aliens of every color and shape screamed over one another. Some demanded the human's execution. Others whispered ancient prophecies that spoke of the Star-Sitter, the one who would rise beside the Empress and bring balance to the galaxy. Guards tried to restore order, but even they trembled. Afraid of what had just happened, Eli sat still, unsure whether to stand or stay seated. His hands rested on his knees, his heart racing, but his face calm. He didn't understand what crime he had committed. He only saw fear and confusion in every pair of alien eyes staring at him. He whispered to himself, "All this fuss just for sitting down," and shook his head slightly. The Empress remained silent. Her glowing eyes watched the storm of voices beneath her. Her long silver robes flowed like liquid light. Her calmness was more terrifying than any shout. When she finally spoke, her voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Enough," she said, and every sound in the hall vanished instantly. Her gaze swept across her council. "You speak of curses, of legends, of fear," she continued. "But I see only ignorance." The ministers knelt quickly, their foreheads touching the crystal floor. "Your radiance," one of them stammered. "The seat beside you is sacred. No being has dared sit there for 10 centuries. It is forbidden by your own decree." The Empress slowly turned toward him. "Then perhaps my decree was wrong," she said softly. Her words sent a chill through every soul present. No one had ever heard her question herself. The Empress of 1,000 worlds admitting doubt. It was unthinkable. Eli blinked in surprise. He hadn't expected anyone to defend him, especially not the ruler of the galaxy. He cleared his throat nervously. "Look, I really didn't mean any disrespect," he said. "I've been working all day and the seat was empty. I just thought maybe it was okay." 1,000 eyes turned toward him. The guards tightened their grip on their weapons. A few nobles hissed in disgust at his casual tone. But the Empress smiled faintly. "And you thought correctly," she said. "You may rise, Eli Carter of Earth," his name, spoken by her voice, echoed through the hall like thunder. Eli stood awkwardly, his legs shaking a little. "You know my name?" he asked quietly. "I know every name under my rule," she replied, her voice now softer, almost kind. "But I have not spoken one with warmth for centuries," the hall gasped. The Empress's words felt like lightning through the cold air. The nobles exchanged fearful glances. They could not understand why their divine ruler was speaking to a janitor, as if he were her equal. Then a tall alien noble stepped forward. His armor carved from obsidian, his eyes glowed a deep blue. "Your radiance," he said boldly. "This human must be punished if you do not act. The faith of the Empire will shatter." The Empress looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "You speak of faith," she said quietly. "But what good is faith that crumbles at the sight of a chair?" The noble froze, unable to respond. He bowed his head and stepped back. The Empress turned her attention once more to Eli. "You remind me of something long forgotten," she said. "The courage to act without fear." The ministers exchanged worried whispers. Some of them began transmitting secret messages through their wrist devices. Plotting already, others lowered their heads, trying to appear loyal. The hall's atmosphere was electric, heavy with both wonder and danger. Eli shifted nervously. Should I leave?" he asked. "I don't want to cause any more trouble," but the Empress shook her head slowly. "No," she said, "you will stay." The guards looked confused, but none dared to disobey. The Empress stood, her long robes flowing down the stairs like waves of starlight. She walked toward Eli, every footstep echoing across the chamber. The nobles watched in disbelief as she descended from her throne, something she had not done in living memory. When she stood before him, she was taller than he expected. Her aura radiated warmth and power all at once. She looked down at him and said, "You are not like the others who come before me? They see me as divine, but you see me as a person. Do you know what that means?" Eli hesitated. "That you're real?" he said with a nervous laugh. The Empress closed her eyes for a moment as if savoring the simplicity of that answer. "Yes," she whispered. Real. Then she turned toward her court, her voice ringing with command. This human will remain under my personal protection. Any who touch him without my permission will answer to me directly. The chamber fell into shocked silence again. None dared question her decree, but unease grew like a shadow among them. They whispered among themselves, plotting quietly. For if the Empress had truly found favor in this strange human, then the balance of power in the galaxy might be changing. Eli had no idea that his small act of tired defiance had just become the spark that would set an empire ablaze. He only knew that the day had grown strange, and the eyes of 1,000 worlds were now upon him. The Empress turned to leave the hall, pausing only once to look back at him. Tomorrow, she said softly, you will dine beside me. And as she disappeared behind the golden doors, Eli stood frozen, surrounded by silence and fear, every noble watching him as if he were a living omen. The janitor who had sat beside a goddess and had been invited back. The Empress remembers that night. The stars above the imperial palace burned brighter than usual. The twin moons cast long silver reflections across the marble courtyards, whispering secrets of an empire too old to remember peace. Inside her private chamber, the Empress sat before a wide crystal window. Her gaze distant, her crown rested beside her, and for the first time in centuries her head felt light. Her mind drifted back to a time before fear ruled her court, before her name became legend, before thrones turned to prisons. She had ruled for so long that even the stars seemed to age around her. She had seen civilizations rise and fall, heard countless voices worship her and curse her alike, but tonight, her thoughts returned to one single face, a human face, one she had not dared to remember for ages. The face of Commander Arik Hale, the human who once sat beside her, the one who taught her that leadership was not domination, but trust. The room shimmered as old memories stirred. The faint echo of laughter filled the air. She remembered the smell of burnt ozone on the battlefield, the flash of human railguns tearing through the darkness, the moment Arik had stood beside her throne during the First Galactic War and said, "You may command stars, but you still need someone who tells you when you're wrong." She had laughed then. She hadn't laughed since now another human, Eli Carter, had done the same. Not with boldness or strategy, but with quiet, thoughtless honesty, sitting beside her as if she were just another being, not a god, not a ruler, just someone tired like him. A soft chime interrupted her thoughts. "Your radiance," came the voice of her aide. A small, delicate creature made of shifting light. The human requests permission to enter the lower gardens. The Empress hesitated. Her voice, calm and gentle, replied, "Allow him outside." Eli wandered through the garden paths, still trying to process the madness of the day. Giant, luminous flowers swayed in the soft wind, their petals glowing like living lanterns. Strange creatures scuttled between the roots, and a waterfall of liquid starlight flowed into a golden pool. He stared in awe, whispering, "This place doesn't even feel real." He sat by the pool's edge, tossing pebbles into the glowing water. Each ripple shimmered with faint colors that danced like ghosts. His mind swirled with questions. Why had she smiled at him? Why was he still alive? And why did the most powerful being in the galaxy care about a janitor from Earth? Footsteps approached behind him, slow, graceful, deliberate. He didn't need to turn to know who it was. The air itself seemed to bow before her. "You should not be here alone," she said softly. Her voice was calm but carried weight. Like the wind before a storm. Eli smiled faintly. "I could say the same about you," he said. "Rulers usually have guards, right?" The Empress stopped beside him, her robes flowing like silver smoke. "Guards protect me from others," she said, "but who protects me from myself?" He looked up at her, confused but intrigued. "What do you mean?" She lowered herself slowly to the ground beside him, the first time she had sat on anything that wasn't her throne in centuries. Her reflection shimmered beside his in the pool. Two figures, one radiant, one plain, sharing the same quiet moment. "A long time ago," she began, "I had an advisor, a human commander. He was the first to treat me as an equal, not as a goddess. He sat beside me. As you did today." Eli listened silently, watching the faint sadness in her eyes. "When he died," she continued, "I swore no one would ever sit there again. I told myself it was respect. But in truth it was fear. I feared remembering him. I feared being reminded that I could feel." She turned her gaze toward him. "When you sat there, Eli, I remembered what I had forgotten." Eli's throat tightened slightly. He didn't know what to say. He had never imagined his simple action could mean something so deep. He scratched his head, then smiled gently. Maybe. You just needed someone who wasn't afraid of you. The Empress looked at him for a long time, then laughed softly. The sound was like the chiming of crystal bells, faint but beautiful. Perhaps, she said, you humans have a strange gift. You see gods and still talk to them like people. He shrugged. Well, where I'm from, everyone's just people. Even the ones sitting on shiny chairs. Her smile widened, and for a brief moment, the galaxy felt lighter. Her mind, burdened for millennia, found peace in a human simplicity. But far beyond the palace walls, not everyone shared her calm across the empire. News of the humans' act spread like wildfire. On distant worlds, alien priests declared omens. Rebel factions saw weakness in the throne, and hidden powers began to stir. As the two sat by the glowing pool, unaware of the storm gathering in the void, a shadow watched from the darkness above. The eyes of those who had long waited for the Empress to falter were now open. Eli looked up at the stars, unaware that his quiet conversation had already changed the course of history. The Empress followed his gaze, whispering softly, "Perhaps the universe still remembers mercy," and for the first time in centuries, she didn't feel like a ruler of 1,000 suns. She simply felt human. The Galactic Rebellion. Morning arrived not with sunlight but with the soft hum of orbiting defense platforms above the capital world. The twin moons hung low, tinted red from the reflection of distant battleships across the crystal hall. The tension was thick enough to silence even the air itself. The nobles stood in their appointed places, their jeweled robes glittering beneath the translucent ceiling. Yet their faces carried fear instead of pride. Something was shifting in the galaxy, and everyone felt it. The Empress entered the hall, her steps slow, her eyes calm, but there was no mistaking the storm hidden behind that calmness. Whispers stopped the moment she appeared. Every noble bowed, but their movements were half-hearted. Their loyalty had begun to crack, and she could feel it like cracks in a glass window. Eli followed behind her, his gray janitor uniform looking terribly out of place in the sea of luxury. He held his mop handle like a walking stick. Trying not to trip on the shining floors, his heart pounded. He still couldn't understand how a simple man like him had ended up here, beside the most powerful being in the galaxy. When the Empress took her seat, the throne's energy flared, casting ripples of golden light across the hall. Eli stopped at her side, unsure if he should sit again. The memory of the last time he did that still made his stomach twist. The Empress glanced at him and nodded slightly. "Sit," she said. And so, before the eyes of 1,000 nobles, the human janitor once again sat beside their living goddess. It was as if time stopped. Then came the murmurs, the whispers, the faint growl of rebellion. A tall alien, covered in silver armor and marked with noble crests, stepped forward. "Your Radiance," he said, his voice cold but steady. "The council demands explanation. Why does this creature sit where only the divine may rest?" The Empress regarded him with a gaze that could melt steel. "Because he has earned it," she said, her voice firm. The alien's mandibles clicked. "Earned it? By breaking sacred law? By mocking our faith? By being honest," the Empress interrupted. "By being unafraid of me?" A shock ran through the crowd. Some nobles gasped, others hissed, and a few dared to glare at Eli openly. The Empress continued, her tone colder now. "You all serve me because you fear me, but fear builds no empire. It only builds cages." The armored noble bowed slightly, but his eyes gleamed with rebellion. "Then perhaps your cage is of your own making." "Your Radiance," he said slowly. "And perhaps it is time to open it." The words were bold, too bold. Eli noticed the way the guards hesitated, their loyalty uncertain. The Empress stood, her crown glowing faintly. "Choose your next words carefully," she warned. But it was too late. Across the room, several nobles activated their wrist devices. A blinding flash filled the chamber. The sound of explosions echoed from outside. Alarms blared through the palace corridors. The rebellion had begun. Eli ducked instinctively, covering his head as shockwaves rocked the chamber. The golden glass cracked, fragments raining like falling stars. Guards rushed forward, weapons drawn. But confusion reigned everywhere. Some followed the Empress. Others followed their treacherous lords. The Empress stood at the center of the chaos, unmoving. Her silver eyes burned with fury and sorrow all at once. "They were waiting for this," she whispered. "The moment I showed weakness, they struck." Eli grabbed her arm. "We have to move," he said. "It's not safe here." Her gaze softened when she looked at him. You think I fear death? She asked quietly. He shook his head, no. But I think your people still need you, for a heartbeat. The Empress said nothing. Then slowly she nodded. Her robe shimmered as she activated her psionic shield, a wave of transparent energy wrapping around them both. Together, they ran through the corridors as the palace trembled. Outside, the night sky burned. Dozens of warships descended through the clouds, firing streams of plasma that scorched the golden towers. The city of light was turning into a field of fire. Civilians screamed, transports lifted off. The Empire was crumbling before their eyes. As they reached the lower levels, Eli caught sight of his reflection in a shattered mirror. Sweat, dust, and disbelief painted across his face. This can't be happening, he muttered. I'm just a janitor. The Empress looked at him. Her voice steady. Not anymore, she said. They entered the command chamber, where a small group of loyal guards held the line. One of them, a reptilian officer with burn marks across his scales, saluted. Your Radiance, half the fleet has turned against us. We can't hold the capital. Then we will not hold it, she replied. We will protect what remains, Eli stepped forward, glancing at the glowing display showing ship movements. You can reroute the energy grid, he said quickly. The palace's power lines connect to the city's shield array if you divert it. You can protect the civilian sectors. The guards exchanged uncertain looks. The officer frowned. That would drain power from our defense systems. Eli nodded, yeah. But it'll save millions of lives. The Empress stared at him for a long moment, then said, do it. Her voice left no room for debate. The officer bowed and ran to the control panels. Eli watched her as she stood beside the glowing screens, calm amid the chaos. You're risking everything, he said quietly. She looked at him and smiled faintly. Everything worth ruling is worth risking, she said. Outside, the golden domes of the capital city shimmered one last time before the great shield rose above them, protecting the innocent below. In that moment, the Empress's legend changed forever. She was no longer the untouchable goddess on the throne. She was the protector who stood among her people. But in the deep void beyond the system, fleets gathered, vast, dark, and silent, waiting for the right moment to strike again. The rebellion was not over. It had only just begun. And as the fires burned, the human janitor stood beside the Empress of 1,000 suns, unaware that his small act of courage had already made him a symbol. The human within the storm. The palace corridors shook as explosions thundered outside. Every wall flickered with the glow of failing energy shields. The once glorious capital of the Empire, the heart of 1,000 worlds, was collapsing in flames. Yet through the storm of chaos, one quiet human kept moving. Eli Carter gripped his broken mop handle like a staff, his eyes scanning the trembling hallways. He wasn't a soldier, not an engineer, not a hero. He was just a janitor who refused to run. He reached the power core chamber, a vast circular room humming with blue light. Cables thicker than tree trunks hung from the ceiling. Each pulse of energy made the air vibrate. The smell of ozone burned in his nose. 2 alien engineers lay wounded near the control panel. Sparks raining over them, Eli rushed forward, dragging them away from the fire. Hang on, I've got you, he said, coughing as smoke filled the room. The Empress entered moments later, surrounded by the faint shimmer of her psionic shield. Her gown, once spotless and regal, was torn and dusted with ash. Her crown glowed dimly, flickering like a dying star, yet her posture remained unbroken. She carried herself not like a goddess, but like a soldier from a forgotten war. Status, she commanded. Eli turned toward her, wiping soot from his face. The power grid's unstable. The rebels cut through the primary conduits. If we don't reroute now, the city's shield will fail in minutes, she nodded. What do you need? Eli blinked, almost laughing at the question. What I need? A miracle, maybe some duct tape, and people who'll listen when I tell them what to do. The Empress tilted her head slightly. Then you have me. He stared at her, realizing she wasn't joking. All right then, he said. We start with the auxiliary lines, they're manual. Someone's got to crawl through the conduit tunnels to reset them. Without hesitation, she said, show me. Eli shook his head. No way, those tunnels are too small and they're crawling with electrical discharges. You'd be fried. The Empress's silver eyes gleamed. You think a goddess fears a little lightning? He sighed. I think lightning fears you, but I'll go. Before she could argue, Eli climbed into the tunnel hatch, the hum of energy buzzing around him. Sparks leapt across his arms as he crawled through the tight metallic shaft. Every few feet he had to stop and reconnect wires. His hands trembling but steady, sweat dripped from his forehead. His entire life he'd fixed broken things, machines, floors, tools, but now he was fixing the heart of a civilization. The Empress watched the glowing lights shift across the control panels as the power rerouted. She could hear his voice echo faintly through the comms. Almost there. I think I found the problem. Yeah, some genius overloaded the junction. A burst of static cut him off, followed by a distant crack of electricity. Her heart clenched. For centuries she had not feared for anyone's life, yet now, one fragile human made her feel the weight of loss again. She closed her eyes, whispering, "Hold on." Eli inside the conduit, Eli's vision blurred. He could feel his muscles twitch from the energy surging through the walls. He reached the junction node, a massive coil of plasma cables glowing like molten veins. With one last push, he jammed the manual lever down. The entire tunnel shook. Light exploded around him, then silence. The control panels in the chamber stabilized. Power readings climbed back into the green zone. The shields outside flared to full strength, protecting the city once more. The Empress exhaled softly. "He did it," she whispered a moment later. The hatch opened and Eli stumbled out, half burned, his uniform torn, a faint smile on his face. "Told you," he said weakly. "Just needed a little elbow grease." The Empress moved forward faster than anyone could react. She caught him before he collapsed. Her arms glowed faintly, energy flowing into him, healing what she could. "You risked everything," she said quietly. Eli managed a faint grin. "Well, cleaning up messes is my job." "Ma'am." Something inside her broke and healed all at once. She had seen warriors sacrifice worlds for glory. Yet this human with no rank and no armor had risked his life for people he didn't even know. It reminded her of the first time she met humanity long ago, of their strange mix of stubbornness and compassion. Outside, the rebel fleet regrouped. Their leader, a cruel warlord named Varkan, transmitted his message to every world. "The throne has fallen, the goddess bleeds. The age of fear is over." His ships began their descent, thousands of cannons ready to finish what they had started. Eli stood beside the Empress, still shaky but determined. "They're coming back, aren't they?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady. "And they will find I am not as fragile as they believe." She turned to the loyal guards who remained. "Prepare the final defense grid. Evacuate the civilians through the undercity tunnels. The capital will not fall while I still breathe." Her command filled the air with purpose. Soldiers saluted. Engineers ran to their stations. The palace came alive again, not with fear, but with resolve. Eli watched her, awe in his eyes. "You're really going to stay and fight?" She looked at him, her gaze soft but unwavering. "You showed me what courage is, human. It would be an insult not to return it." He smiled, gripping his scorched mop handle like a spear. "Then I guess we fight together." As the first tremors of enemy fire shook the ground, the Empress raised her hand and the palace shields roared to life once more. Lightning danced across the sky. The rebellion would not break her, not while one human still stood beside her, and somewhere in the burning heavens, the galaxy began to whisper a new legend of a janitor who taught a goddess how to fight like a human. The final stand of the Empress. The sky above the capital was no longer blue. It had turned into a storm of fire and light. Rebel warships filled the heavens like dark constellations, their cannons glowing with death. The once peaceful world beneath them now shook beneath constant bombardment. Towers fell, streets burned, and yet the palace still stood, defiant and shining through the haze inside its great halls. The Empress walked among the wounded, her bare feet leaving trails of silver light across the cracked marble. Her power pulsed softly, healing burns, closing wounds, whispering strength into those who had lost hope. The soldiers bowed as she passed, but this time they did not see a goddess. They saw a leader standing among them, breathing the same smoke, facing the same fear. Eli worked beside the medics, his uniform blackened with soot. His hands were blistered, his face streaked with ash. Yet he moved with purpose, fixing broken tools, hauling power cells, patching holes in the walls every few minutes. The ground trembled as another bombardment hit the shields. "They're not going to stop," he muttered, tightening a bolt on a damaged generator. The Empress appeared beside him, her eyes tired but steady. "They will," she said softly. "When we make them," Eli looked at her, sweat dripping down his neck. "You still think we can win this?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned her gaze toward the ceiling, where faint rays of light broke through the dust. "Victory is not survival," she said at last. "It is meaning. It is what remains when we are gone." Before Eli could reply, a deafening explosion tore through the palace's west wing. The floor split open, fire erupted, and screams echoed through the comms. The shields had finally failed. The rebels were inside. The Empress straightened, her aura igniting like a star reborn. "Seal the lower gates," she ordered. "Get the civilians to the tunnels." A loyal guard hesitated. "And you, Your Radiance?" "I will hold the throne," she said, her tone calm as the eye of a hurricane. Eli stepped forward, gripping his burnt mop handle like a weapon. "Then you're not doing it alone," she gave him a faint smile. "I would not dream of it." They moved through the collapsing corridors, smoke and sparks swirling around them. The sound of blaster fire drew closer. Alien soldiers in rebel colors poured into the grand chamber. Their banners of rebellion fluttered where once peace had ruled. The Empress raised her hand and the air trembled. A wave of psychic energy burst forth, scattering the attackers like leaves in a storm. Her power illuminated the entire hall, every shattered crystal reflecting her fury. Yet for every enemy that fell, more came, an endless tide of rage and betrayal. Eli ducked behind a fallen pillar, rerouting wires into a damaged turret. "Come on, work," he muttered. The turret sputtered to life, firing plasma bolts that tore through the enemy lines. He grinned. "Now that's what I'm talking about." The Empress fought like a storm-given flesh. Her silver eyes blazed, her voice rang out like thunder. Every motion of her hand reshaped reality itself. Blades of light tore through the air, shields shimmered around the defenders. The palace was no longer just a building. It was alive with her will. But even her strength had limits. The constant attacks drained her, each blast of energy dimming her glow. Eli saw it, how her movements slowed, how her breaths grew shallow. "You need to rest," he shouted over the noise. She shook her head. "There is no rest for the last light." The main gates burst open and the rebel leader, Varkon, entered, towering in black armor. His voice boomed across the hall. "Your reign ends tonight, false goddess." The Empress stepped forward, her energy flaring again. "If I am false, then what are you but fear pretending to be strength?" Varkon roared and charged, his blade humming with crimson energy. Their clash shook the hall, lightning against steel, power against fury. Eli watched, heart pounding, knowing that one mistake could end it all. He spotted the collapsing energy conduit above the throne. If it fell, it would crush them both. Without thinking, he ran forward, climbing the cracked support beams. The heat was unbearable, metal burning beneath his hands. He reached the control node and slammed his mop handle into the override, diverting the surge just as Varkon struck. The explosion ripped through the chamber, blinding light swallowing everything. When the smoke cleared, Varkon lay motionless, his armor shattered. The Empress knelt beside Eli, who had fallen hard against the steps. Her hands trembled as she lifted his head. "Eli," she whispered. "Why?" He coughed weakly. "Couldn't let the place get messy again," he joked faintly. Tears shimmered in her silver eyes. "You foolish, beautiful creature," she said, her voice breaking for the first time in centuries. She placed her hand over his chest, pouring her remaining energy into him. The glow spread, gentle and warm. The palace began to quiet. The enemy had fled. The capital stood in ruins but alive outside. The sky cleared, and the twin moons rose over a wounded yet living world. The Empress looked at Eli, her voice soft. "Humanity, you never fail to surprise me." He managed a weak smile. "We do our best," and then the glow faded from her hands. Her strength exhausted, she sank to her knees beside him, the light of her crown dimming until only her natural glow remained. "Rest," she whispered. "You have earned the stars." As dawn rose over the broken city, two figures sat side by side at the steps of a shattered throne. One mortal, one divine, united not by power or command but by courage across the galaxy. Transmissions carried a single message, whispered by those who survived. The Empress still stands, and beside her, a human. The rebellion had not ended, but its heart had been broken. And in that fragile silence, hope returned to the stars. The seat beside the stars, the fires had long burned out, but the smoke of the rebellion still drifted through the once golden skies. The palace stood half in ruin, its towers broken and its crystal halls scarred, yet the light that shone from within was brighter than ever. For from the ashes of war, something greater had been born. Not an empire of fear, but an age of remembrance. Weeks passed before the galaxy dared to breathe again. The Empress sat upon her throne, not in the shadow of divinity, but in the quiet strength of humanity. The throne beside her, once forbidden for millennia, no longer stood empty. Upon it rested a new seat, crafted from silver and steel. Its design simple but beautiful, carved with the emblem of Earth. Every day, diplomats and citizens from countless species came to the Crystal Hall. They no longer bowed in silence. They spoke, questioned, shared, and the Empress listened, not as a goddess commanding from above, but as a ruler who had walked through fire beside her people. The story of the human janitor who had defied the galaxy had already become legend. Some said Eli Carter had died in the blast. Others believed he still lived, working quietly in the depths of the palace, fixing what was broken, smiling at those who had forgotten how to smile. But the truth was known only to the Empress. Each dawn, before the court assembled, she would walk to the Garden of Starlight, the place where he had once sat beside her under the twin moons. The pool still shimmered with that same gentle glow. The ripples caught the reflection of two figures, always side by side, one radiant, one plain. She would stand there for hours, her hand resting on a simple mop handle now polished and set in glass. He was never meant to rule, she would whisper to the stars, but he taught rulers how to serve. The empire had changed forever. Worlds that once feared her name now carried her banners with pride, not out of fear but faith in something new, hope. Across the colonies, statues of the Empress were no longer carved in stone and gold, but in steel and bronze, showing her not on a throne, but standing beside a human equal and unafraid on Earth. The legend became a story told to children before sleep. They would look at the night sky and imagine the janitor who sat beside a goddess, who cleaned the halls of heaven and left them brighter than he found them. It became a reminder that courage does not come from power, but from the simple choice to act when others hesitate. In the Crystal Hall, the Empress now wore no crown, only a silver band of light across her brow. Her robes were simpler, her throne humbler. She ruled not through fear but through compassion. Her advisors no longer trembled before her. They spoke to her as equals, and when they asked why the second throne remained beside hers, always empty, she would smile faintly and say, "Because it never truly is." The galaxy began to heal. Trade returned. Alliances formed, and across 1,000 worlds, the word human became a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even in a universe ruled by gods, kindness could still change destiny. One quiet evening, as the stars drifted in slow rivers across the horizon, the Empress walked once more into her garden. The air was cool, the wind soft, and for the first time since the battle, she felt peace settle over her like gentle rain. She sat beside the glowing pool, her reflection flickering beside another, the faint shimmer of a man's outline, smiling as he once had. "You would hate the ceremony," she whispered with a soft laugh. Too many speeches, too many songs. The reflection smiled wider. Fading into the light of the moons, she closed her eyes, listening to the hum of the universe, the echo of his laughter somewhere in the distance. Far beyond, the stars pulsed gently like heartbeats, as if the cosmos itself remembered the story. Somewhere among those stars, a new monument floated, a station built in orbit where once the rebel fleet had fallen. It bore a single name carved in both Terran and Imperial script, Eli Carter, the one who sat beside the stars, and beneath it, the Empress's own words were engraved. "Power is nothing without humility, and immortality is empty without compassion." Humanity taught us both, as the light of dawn spread across the horizon. The Empress rose from her seat and turned toward the hall where her people waited. The mop handle gleamed faintly in its case, a relic now more sacred than any crown. For the galaxy no longer worshipped gods, it remembered a human, a janitor who had dared to sit beside an Empress and in doing so, had taught the stars how to shine again.